"We need to pause," the general counsel said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Effective immediately, all voting authority is frozen." Chairs shifted. Someone swore under their breath. At the far end of the table, a board member leaned toward another and whispered, barely audible, "We just lost control." I sat there quietly, hands folded, watching the color drain from faces that had never imagined this meeting could end before it even began. 36 hours earlier, I had been standing in my CEO's office, alone. "Marie, sit," Richard Hale said, already sliding a folder across the desk. He did not look at me when he spoke. "This position is no longer necessary. I am Marie Caldwell." I had spent 9 years keeping that company operational, while men like Richard took credit for stability they never built. Inside the folder was a resignation letter, not a termination, a resignation. Clean, polite, final. "Sign it," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "And leave with your dignity intact." I let the silence stretch. "You know how this works," he continued. "If you force a dispute, it will follow you. Boards talk, investors remember. I'm offering you a graceful exit." There it was. The threat dressed up as courtesy. I picked up the pen, my hand did not shake. I signed my name on every page, slow and deliberate, exactly where the tabs indicated. When I slid the papers back, I smiled. "Very proper procedure," I said. Richard's fingers froze on the folder, just for a moment. His eyes flicked to the signature, then back to my face, searching for something he could not name. "You'll receive your final compensation details by end of day," he said, recovering. "Security will walk you out. That won't be necessary," I replied. Standing. "I know the way." I left without another word, the echo of his confidence trailing behind me. The story you're about to hear is a fictional narrative created by the writing team at Her Revenge. While inspired by real workplace dynamics and power imbalances, all characters, companies, and events are imagined for storytelling purposes. This chapter marks the beginning of a story about quiet leverage, invisible authority, and the consequences of underestimating the woman who understands the rules. By the time the elevator doors closed, my phone was already vibrating with messages I did not read yet. There would be time for that. What mattered was that everything had been set in motion, and nothing Richard Hale believed about that day was true. The security guard didn't touch me, but he walked close enough that everyone noticed. "Elevators this way," he said, not unkindly, just loud enough for the nearby desks to hear. "I know," I replied. I helped choose where it went. A few heads lifted, most dropped just as quickly. People had already decided what I was now. At the lobby desk, Jenna from reception looked up. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "Marie," she said quietly. "I didn't. It's fine," I said. "You're doing your job." The guard stopped walking. "Badge, please." I handed it over. The plastic felt lighter than it should have after 9 years. He examined it like he expected it to argue back. "Personal items?" he asked. "Already gone," I said. That part was true. I had stopped leaving anything important behind months ago. The revolving doors carried me out, and the noise of the building softened behind me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. "Are you sure?" came the message. No name, no greeting. I typed back. I signed. "There's no going back now." 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, "If this fails, you lose everything." I knew. I had replayed that sentence all night. The call had come late, after midnight. I remembered my own voice sounding steadier than I felt. "I'm exercising the option." I had said all of it. The silence on the other end had lasted too long. "That's not a threat," the man finally replied. "That's a cliff." "I understand cliffs," I told him. "Send the confirmation." Standing on the sidewalk now, I felt the weight of that choice settle in my chest. I hadn't signed because I was certain. I had signed because refusing would have ended me just as cleanly. Only without leverage. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud and indulgent. This was containment. Survival. My phone buzzed again, this time with a different message. "Documents received. Processing." I closed my eyes, just for a second, then started walking. People assume operations is paperwork, schedules, checklists, quiet compliance. They never see the damage control. "Marie, we need this fixed by morning," a former CFO had told me years ago. dropping a folder on my desk without slowing down. Don't make it loud. Inside were vendor contracts signed without approval, penalties buried in footnotes, and a liquidity gap that could have triggered a breach. I stayed until dawn. By noon, the crisis had a new name and a different owner. Not me. That was my role. Finance when numbers lied. Governance when executives forgot rules applied to them. I learned early that Chicago rewarded results but punished visibility. The louder you were, the faster the knives came out. You're good at this, Daniel Mercer once said to me after a board prep session. He was outside counsel back then, careful with compliments. Too good. That's the job, I said. He shook his head. No, the job is getting credit. What you're doing is surviving. I had smiled. The same polite smile people mistake for compliance. Daniel lowered his voice. People like you don't survive board politics. You make others look careless. I remembered that warning as I rode the train home that night, years before Richard Hale ever learned my name. I remembered choosing not to correct him in meetings, not to push back publicly, not to take the microphone when it was offered. Let them talk. I had told myself, I'll build, in Chicago. Reputations are currency. I never spent mine. I stored it, quietly, carefully, through audit trails, contingency clauses, and relationships that did not announce themselves. Richard believed power came from the head of the table. He never noticed who prepared the table, who wrote the rules that governed it, who made sure the company stayed standing after every bad decision dressed up as confidence. I had stayed invisible because visibility invites interference. Influence does not. By the time the train doors closed behind me, my phone chimed again. Preliminary confirmation complete. I exhaled slowly. The city moved on around me, indifferent as always. That was fine. I had learned how to work inside systems that only noticed you when they failed. The call came at 11:47 the night before Richard fired me. You're early, Thomas Reed said. His voice was clipped, exhausted. Thomas never called unless something was wrong. He represented Sentinel Harbor Holdings, a name that meant nothing to most people and everything to the cap table. You said to call when the window opened, I replied. He exhaled. The window opened because it had to. The injunction hit this afternoon. My client needs liquidity before morning. I didn't pretend to be surprised. The right of first refusal is still valid. Yes, he said. And if you don't exercise it, the shares go to a consortium that will tear the company apart. There it was. Pressure disguised as information. I'll take the full allocation, I said. Silence stretched. Then Thomas spoke more carefully. Marie, that's 79%. Once this executes, there's no anonymity left inside the structure. Someone will connect the dots. They won't, I said, not in time. He hesitated. You understand what this costs. I understand what it prevents. Papers moved on his end. The holding entity already funded. I said, already cleared. Another pause. This isn't revenge, he said quietly. This is control. Yes, I answered. And it's overdue, by 12:38. The confirmations began to arrive. Transfer approvals, trustee acknowledgements, language so precise it felt almost gentle. I read every line. I signed once, then again, at 1:14. Thomas came back on the line. It's done, he said, 79%. Voting rights included. Effective immediately. I closed my eyes, not in relief, but in recognition. This was the point of no return. Marie, he added, softer now. They're not going to see this coming. They never do, I said. They only notice ownership when it stops doing what they expect. I ended the call and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to my own breathing. By morning, Richard Hale would believe he was ending my authority. In reality, he would be signing against it. Richard Hale liked to explain power as if it were physics. Inertia matters, he once said during an executive meeting, leaning back in his chair. Capital doesn't move unless someone scares it. No one challenged him. They rarely did. After I was fired, I replayed that sentence while my phone lit up with internal chatter I was no longer copied on. Richard believed the majority shareholder was passive capital, a holding entity that showed up on reports, voted when prompted, and stayed silent otherwise. He had built his confidence on that silence. I remembered a meeting from the previous year, when legal had flagged a governance concern. Technically, the compliance officer said carefully, this decision requires notice. Richard waved a hand. Technically, a lot of things require notice. We'll clean it up later, no consequences followed. The company kept moving. That pattern taught him a dangerous lesson. The morning he fired me, his certainty was intact. You're not a risk, he told me, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. You don't have the appetite for disruption. People like you prefer stability. People like me. He assumed I would leave quietly because I always had. He assumed my loyalty to process meant obedience. He assumed the rules bent the same way every time because they always had for him. What he never understood was that process remembers. As I signed the resignation letter, my eyes caught a line he hadn't bothered to customize. Standard language, termination without board review. I almost laughed. That clause existed for a reason. Executive termination involving material influence required notice, approval, documentation. He skipped all of it because he believed my influence ended at my job title. When I slid the papers back and smiled, his confidence flickered, not because he saw the mistake, but because he sensed a deviation he couldn't name. Richard thought control meant authority exercised loudly and often. He never learned to fear the kind that waited. By the time he escorted me out, the violation was already logged, not by me, by the system he trusted until it stopped protecting him. I sent the email at 8:12 in the morning, no subject line theatrics, no legal threats, just a single line of text and 3 attachments. Within minutes, my phone rang. "Marie," said Allison Crane, Deputy General Counsel. Her voice was controlled, but thinner than usual. "I need to confirm the authenticity of what you sent. You have the original filings," I replied. "Check the timestamps." Silence followed, then a quiet breath. "We are by 9:15, the approvals stopped." I learned that not from an alert, but from the absence of one. No routine sign-offs, no automated summaries. The internal system that normally hummed without interruption had gone still. At 9:40, Richard called. "Why is legal blocking my approvals?" he demanded. "I have a live acquisition call in 20 minutes. I'm no longer authorized to answer that," I said. "You triggered this," he snapped. "Undo it." "I didn't trigger anything," I replied. "I submitted documentation." He laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Documentation doesn't shut down a company." "It does when the documentation is valid," I said. He hung up. At 10 o'clock. The acquisition call disappeared from the calendar. No explanation, just removed. At 10:18, a senior vice president messaged me from a personal account. "Do you know what's happening?" I didn't respond. At 10:32, Allison called again. "Marie, until this is reviewed by the board, we are advising all executives to suspend discretionary actions." "That's appropriate," I said. "You understand what this means," she continued. "No hiring, no terminations, no restructuring. Everything pauses." "Yes," I said. "That was the point of the clause." She hesitated. "Richard is not handling this well. I imagine not." After we ended the call, I sat quietly, watching notifications fail to arrive. No approvals, no denials, just nothing. The company wasn't reacting emotionally. It wasn't panicking. It was obeying a structure that had finally been noticed. By midday, people stopped asking questions out loud. Conversations shifted to closed rooms and muted lines. Everyone felt it. The moment when motion became liability. The system had spoken, and for the first time, no one was willing to override it. The first call came from the board chair's assistant, not Richard. "Marie Caldwell," she said, careful and formal. "You are requested to attend an emergency board session this afternoon." "Requested," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "Notified under shareholder protocol?" That word landed differently. Before I could respond, another line clicked in. "Marie," Daniel Mercer said. He no longer introduced himself. "They're asking questions Richard can't answer." "What kind of questions?" I asked. He exhaled. The kind he's never had to answer before. I didn't need more detail. I could already hear it. Who authorized the termination? Where is the notice of review? Which governance clause applies? Richard had enforced rules for years without reading them. Now they were being read aloud. "He keeps saying legal will handle it," Daniel added. "Legal isn't moving. They can't." I said. A pause. "You planned this. I prepared for it. I corrected." By midday, the tone inside the company had shifted. Not panic, scrutiny. Emails stopped copying Richard automatically. Calendar invites went unanswered. Authority was no longer assumed. At 1:15, my phone buzzed again. "Marie," said Eleanor Shaw, Senior Independent Director. Her voice was steady, seasoned. "We need clarity." "On what?" I asked. "On who we're actually accountable to right now." I let that sit. "We've reviewed the filings," she continued. "Some of us more carefully than others. Some of you already knew." I said, "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Some of us suspected." At 2:00, Richard finally called me himself. "This is a misunderstanding," he said tightly. "You need to tell them that." "I don't," I replied. "They're reading the documents." "You were operations," he said. "You don't get to do this." "I didn't do anything," I said. "You did." "I signed what you gave me." Silence. Then, quieter. "Are you attending the session?" "Yes," I said. "As what?" he demanded. I didn't raise my voice. "As someone you should have checked before you slid that paper across your desk." The call ended without goodbye. Minutes later, the official invite arrived. Board session. Voting members and controlling stakeholders only. My name was listed under the second heading. The meeting began on time. That alone felt deliberate. Eleanor Shaw opened the folder in front of her and spoke without preamble. "This session is convened to address procedural irregularities related to an executive termination." Richard leaned forward. "With respect, this is unnecessary." "Legal is reviewing, legal is present," Eleanor said, not looking at him. "And they are not speaking yet." A murmur passed through the room and then stopped when Daniel Mercer cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "the revised ownership register must be entered into record." Richard frowned. "Revised by whom?" "By the transfer agent," Daniel replied. "Verified this morning," Eleanor nodded. "Sentinel Harbor Holdings now holds 79% of voting control." The silence that followed was complete. Richard's chair creaked as he shifted. "That's not possible," he said. "Sentinel is passive. They exercise their rights," Daniel said. "All of them." Eleanor turned a page. "Those rights are controlled by Marie Caldwell." Every eye in the room moved to me. I didn't speak. "This changes nothing," Richard said, too quickly. "She was terminated." "That termination," Eleanor said, lifting a document, "is invalid." She held up the resignation letter. The one he had written. The one he had slid across his desk. "No board notice," Daniel said. "No review. No authorization. Involving a controlling stakeholder." Richard stood. "This is absurd. You're overturning my authority over a technicality." "You removed your own authority," Eleanor said calmly. "On paper." The vote followed. No speeches, no debates. Just names and responses. One by one, the answers came back the same. When it ended, Eleanor closed the folder, effective immediately. "Richard Hale is removed as Chief Executive Officer." Richard remained standing, hands on the table, as if waiting for someone to stop it. No one did. He gathered his things slowly and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final. The company was quiet again. After Richard left, no one spoke for several seconds. Eleanor broke the silence. "Marie," she said, measured, as controlling stakeholder, "you are entitled to assume the chief executive role immediately." I shook my head. "No." A few eyebrows lifted. Daniel leaned forward. "You're certain?" "Yes," I said. "That chair is part of the problem." Eleanor studied me. "Then what are you proposing?" "An interim appointment," I replied. "Someone the staff already trusts. Someone who understands operations without turning every decision into a performance." A name surfaced almost immediately. "Leah Brennan," Daniel said. "Chief Integration Officer." "I was thinking the same," Eleanor replied. Leah had never chased attention. She fixed things. She stayed late. She asked questions that made meetings shorter instead of louder. "She'll need cover," Eleanor said. "This transition won't be gentle." "I'll provide that," I answered. From the board, the vote was quick, unanimous. When Leah joined us later that afternoon, she looked uneasy. "I didn't expect this," she said quietly. "No one who should have the job ever does," I replied. She hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want it?" "I'm sure," I said. "You'll lead better without me in that seat." She nodded once. "Then I won't waste it." In the days that followed, the company slowed down just enough to breathe. Approvals resumed, teams recalibrated. The chaos Richard thrived on evaporated. Not everyone thanked me. Some avoided eye contact. Some spoke carefully around me. A few treated me like a necessary complication rather than a solution. I felt it all. Power doesn't come without cost. It just changes who collects it. One afternoon, Eleanor stopped me outside the boardroom. You know, she said, most people would have taken the title. I know, I replied. She held my gaze. That's why this worked. I walked away without responding. The chair remained empty behind me, and for the first time, that felt like progress. I heard about Richard Hale 3 weeks later, not from gossip but from an industry brief, forwarded without comment. Former executive exploring advisory roles. The note read, no company names attached, no endorsements, just a paragraph explaining that several firms had passed after reviewing his governance record. When he called me, his voice was careful. I assume this was intentional. It was documented. I said, there's a difference. You could have pushed harder, he replied, publicly. You chose not to. I didn't need to, I said. The paperwork spoke for itself. He exhaled. You didn't have to ruin me. I didn't ruin you. I answered. I let the record stand. The line went quiet. When the call ended, that was the last I heard of him. No lawsuits followed, no statements, just a narrowing silence that traveled faster than any accusation. Inside the company, Leah's leadership settled into rhythm. Decisions slowed enough to be correct. People stopped performing and started working. I attended board sessions when required, spoke when it mattered, and declined interviews without explanation. One afternoon, Jenna from reception passed me in the lobby. It's good to see you, she said, genuine and unguarded. It's good to be seen properly, I replied. My authority no longer needed proximity. It existed in minutes, in clauses, in approvals that moved because they were allowed to. No one announced it, they adjusted to it. Dignity, I learned, is not something granted by the person sliding a document across a desk. It is preserved by knowing when to sign, when to wait, and when to let structure do what emotion never could. The lesson stayed with me long after the noise faded. Real power is not about occupying the chair everyone watches. It is about understanding the rules that govern the room, protecting your position before you are forced to defend it, and acting so precisely that nothing needs to be said at all. Real power does not shout. It waits.